Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome back to The Balancing Act. I know it's been a hot minute, so we're sorry about that, but, we're busy.
Are we?
No. Nick's busy trying to look beautiful. That's all that one is. Hey, we're really privileged today to have Jon Owen with us. Jon is the pastor and CEO at the Wayside Chapel in Sydney CBD, doing some pretty cool things. Hey, Jon, welcome to The Balancing Act.
Hey, how are you guys?
Yeah, doing well,
good,
mate.
bro.
Doing well. Hey, mate, thanks for taking some time out of your day just to sit and to chat with us. We wanted to have you on for a while, actually. You were kind of one of the first people when we were talking around the idea of having a podcast that we wanted to have a chat to.
Yeah.
I was sharing with Nick about the profound kind of impact and that you had with Ash Barker when I was at college at Morling College. You guys came and spoke at a church planting conference, and listening to what you guys were doing. At that point, you were in Melbourne still, about to transition into Mount Druitt, which I want to explore a little bit. But that was just a really profound time. I was really inspired about the kind of things that you guys were doing at the time.
Are you saying he's older than you? He looks fantastic. What happened?
Yeah, I don't know. What? Mate, I've got a head like a half-chewed minty. That's not it's my genetics, okay? It's okay?
But he looks great.
You do. How old are you, Jon?
Turn 50 next year.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
You really look good, man. That's impressive. I thought he was like your age or younger. When you said college, I thought you did it together.
Well, no, but do you two want to have coffee? Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, look, I'll just talk to Nick from here, right?
Yeah, that's right. Like, no, just you two carry on, please, by all means. Hey, Jon, you're doing some pretty interesting stuff at the Wayside Chapel at the moment as pastor and CEO, but this has been a bit of a long journey for you on doing some, what I think in Christian terms is a pretty radical approach to life and mission in that regard. Before we jump into that, can you take us back a little bit? What was childhood like? Did you grow up in a Christian home? How did you come to faith? Those kind of good questions.
Yeah, so look, I was born in Malaysia, but we migrated here when I was fairly young. So as you can hear from my accent, I don't really have too many memories of the first couple of years of my life. So everything I remember from growing up in inner city suburban Melbourne. And so that was a pretty interesting era to grow up, being a person of colour in, at the time, a very, very white neighbourhood. Melbourne is very different now to what it used to be, but back then it was a nice adventure. Mum and Dad pretty quickly found a church that had a congregation that had a lot of Southeast Asian and South Asian worshippers. So we went there, I guess, for Mum and Dad's sense of familiarity and connection with people who kind of looked a little bit similar to them. So that was in Melbourne in a church called Swanston Street Church of Christ, right in the heart of the city. It's now called Cross Culture Church of Christ. And, it was just a standard inner city congregation. But then this one leader there, a guy called Alan Webb, he was very conservative theologically. However, he was quite radical missionally. And, he had this small, 50 to 80 people congregation in the inner city that was kind of aging and decaying whilst being surrounded by all these university campuses. And he said, well, how about we take a risk and reach out to some of the students that are starting to pop up in the 70s and 80s and 90s around some of these campuses and apartments that are emerging in the inner city. So the church went from 60 or 80 people pretty quickly to, I think at its height, 2,000 young worshippers. So it was missionally, it was a very exciting time. Theologically, it was incredibly conservative. My my growing up, my faith um, was very conventional, and and so it was only later on in life that I kind of went on a bit of an exploration journey myself. I think I got to about, the gospel that was preached was God's will is almost indecipherable from the will of your parents, and so if you're South Asian or Southeast Asian, that means clean up, tidy up,
Yeah. Do as you're told.
that is the way to honor God. Is don't swear um, and make a lot of money, and you'll be right, mate. And so I think I got to about my early 20s, and I kind of had one of those moments that we all have where we say, "Is this it? Is that all there is to it?"
Mm.
Because it's not that radical or exciting. And not that I was always out there for the adrenaline of it. I just thought, was Jesus killed for this? It was to create a bunch of people that follow him who are essentially quite bland.
Mm.
And so I said, if there's more to it, and if you want me to be involved with more of it, God, can you show me? And it was, they're very dangerous kinds of prayers to pray. And I think it was from that moment that all of a sudden a lot of the foundational elements of my faith began to be stripped away. And, that's part of it, part of the university journey. I always laugh when parents who raise good Christian kids insist that their kids go to university when not that there's anything inherently wrong with that. However, if you look at some of the church life statistics and surveys, there is a good 80 to 85% chance your child will lose their faith on a university campus.
Mm.
So I'm like,
Mm.
are we sure we're that keen on pushing our kids into that kind of path? And
Mm.
that's for very good reasons, probably sociologically. Is often as families and as church going families, we like to raise our kids in a bit of a bubble.
Yeah.
And so when
Yeah.
they get to university, their heads kind of explode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So I had that kind of moment where I just went, God, show me. And it was not long after that everything that I thought was conventional about faith was kind of stripped away. And I encountered this bunch of people who had kind of given up all thoughts of advancing their careers and had moved into this neighborhood. They were part of that group, Urban Neighbors of Hope, and and this is the early '90s. Where we're joking about yuppies, which is young and upwardly professional. And these people were in quite contrast, were saying we're trying to follow Jesus, so we're taking this path of intentional downward mobility, and very much akin to the Philippians chapter 2 phrase where it says, you know, let's follow this kind of example with Jesus, who did not consider equality with God as something to be grasped, but rather emptied himself and took on the form of a servant, and was obedient even to death on a cross. To butcher that kind of phrase, but that kind of that cadence is a downwards mobility as
Oh,
opposed to this discipleship journey that had said everything in your life should be about onwards and upwards, good Christian soldier, and they were living in this community. They were limiting their outside involvement. They were limiting their incomes to just enough to be able to survive, to live in that community. And then they were just pouring their lives out, very much taking inspiration from passages like the Mary Magdalene, who, anointed Jesus' feet with a bottle of perfume that would have uh, cost a year's wage,
Mm.
according to Judas. But Jesus was saying, she's done something pretty beautiful and that will be remembered forever. Is to say, are we? We're all more than willing uh, to follow Jesus to gain, but who's willing to pour their life out as an offering and a fragrance for God?
So with that, like that's, I mean, it's pretty radical. You kind of connect with Urban Neighbors of Hope. They're living out this kind of radical life. You get connected into that. Mate, I gotta ask, like that is cultural calamity for your upbringing by the sounds of things, right? So you've got kind of, you know, ethnic parents who have been kind of like, do as you're told, build a career, go to uni, wealth is the kind of the safety and the market that we're aiming for. You then connect with this group, Urban Neighbours of Hope, where they're taking, sounds like a vow of poverty. Mate, how did that go down?
Not well, to put it bluntly. And so, I still somewhere in a box in my basement have two quite lengthy letters, one from my father and another one from the head of the elders. Churches of Christ have elders committees, and both of them were saying, "What on earth are you doing? You are turning your back on your family. You and almost, you're not pursuing a faithful kind of
Mm,
discipleship." And so it were difficult days in that for a decade. Mum, I sometimes at night would say, "Oh my goodness, there are much worse ways to be on the outer from your family
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
this."
than that,
Right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I got to say, I was just so full of life as well, in terms of, up until that point, most nights from adolescence, my head had hit the pillow, going, asking that old question, surely there's more to life, right? I still haven't found what I'm looking for to butcher you too. But the moment I said, "Okay, Jesus, if this is what you want, then I'll have a go," you know, my head has hit the pillow and I've fallen asleep every night,
Mm,
very, without being plagued by that existential question. And I didn't realize how much of a gift that is.
mm.
I'm turned 50 next year, and I don't have to wonder. And even some nights I can feel God, patting me on the back saying, "Yeah, that's why I put you here."
You see, we can see that you actually sleep well.
Well, I was gonna say, is that why you look so good?
That we can
Like,
see
it's
that you're
this-
sleeping well. That's pretty crazy.
I only blame COVID and lockdown for the grey hair starting to appear.
yeah,
100%. Yeah.
And the glasses too. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't. I'd still be reading without glasses, and the hair would still be nice and all black.
nice.
Yeah. I like the idea of this idea of downward intentional or
Yeah,
intentional downward mobility. I think that's the phrase you used. And this picture of Philippians chapter 2, right? This image of just embodying Christ. I'm I guess when we think about discipleship, and I think it seems like in the way that you sort of phrased it, it seems like it's at odds, but I don't presume that it is at odds in the way that it is. But when we think about discipleship, it's not discipling upwards, it's discipling unto Christ. And so when you're discipling unto Christ, you should be discipling into the space of humility and service and
Mm.
pouring your body out for the sake of others, right?
yeah, and I think there is an element, at least, a bit. It is a bit of a straw man, granted, but I think there is a place in kind of mainstream, middle class kind of church land that I think what John is saying is pretty true.
Yes.
There is a sense in which we want everyone in this upward trajectory, right?
Mm.
But as we progress in this upward trajectory, I think the risk is that we lose Christ in that, and we lose his mission in that space. I'm not saying that we definitely do that. I said the risk is there for
Yeah,
that.
sure.
So what did that look like then for you, John? So you jump in with Urban Neighbours of Hope. Did you move into that same building block? What did that look like?
Yeah, actually, if we could go on that, if we could continue to tease out what you guys just raised,
Yeah, no, go.
Yeah, sure.
Nick, that would be. I think it's important. Is I think one of the greatest tasks that the three of us would have, as people who have put up their hands to serve in roles that are like pastor and ordained or clergy or something like that, is I would call the discernment of the spirit,
Yeah.
and that is one of the key tasks. And if we look at almost on a decade by decade basis, I think the spirit issues a challenge to the church, and in the um, in the 70s and 80s, it was around how do we break down the division between evangelism and social action? How do we and then if we discern what is the spirit's challenge to the church today? And I would suggest it's along probably two lines right now, and this is just my guess. And if it's anything that I claim to be a discernment of the spirit, it needs to be tested. Is one of them is around loneliness right now, is how disconnected people are
Mm.
and how disconnected we are from ourselves. And the other one definitely I would say is, and we'll get into it probably later, is this disconnection. Before in the 70s and 80s, it was like, is it evangelism or social action? Now we're in a point in our congregations and communities where when I think about every formative experience in my faith and discipleship, it would now be considered illegal according to risk management and safe church frameworks.
Yeah,
Right. And so
that's
we have
yeah.
moved into a place where we have said, let's do the religious stuff and let's partner with our care arms to deliver our social services, and never the twain shall meet. And we wonder why we have let the spirit out the back door in our churches. And I said, if we want to persist with that model, let's cut down our 4-year um, uh, Bible college course down to a 6-week funeral uh, conducting course, right? Because that's all we'll be doing is burying the dead,
So,
right?
so
And
with that, mate, like, because this is one of the things that we've been pondering for a while, um, from a church perspective, because it does feel like the church kind of outsources kind of the risk side of things, the community engagement that does take elements of uh, uncertainty as fear, and then we kind of brush it away, and so we create these social arms of the church, different organizations. But have we lost something in that? Like, have we lost a part of the gospel in by doing that?
oh, absolutely. There's no question of that. Is we and we look over the last few decades, and every form of church is. I'm not bemoaning the need for greater accountability and oversight in the ways we care for our people and how we do that. I when I joke about some of my formative experiences, that means, you know, being thrown on the back of a motorbike with no helmet from a 21-year-old youth group leader to go shooting rabbits, and but
Sounds like a
that probably
cracking
shouldn't
afternoon.
happen.
I'm not allowed to do that now.
Your youth, how many formative conversations did you have one on one when you were the last kid to be dropped off from youth group? And now that would just be considered, almost a sin, if not illegal.
Yeah.
But every denomination had their deal, what I call the deal with the devil. So Churches of Christ is, we'll build you childcare centres, and people will start flooding into your churches, and aged care facilities now, and we've what is the role of the church within it now? We've kind of we've given it all away, and and one of the greatest lessons I learned early on in my journey is that the journey of faith and discipleship isn't meant to be comfortable. I think I used to quote this guy 20, 30 years ago, is the life of discipleship is a radical journey, or it's nothing at all.
Hmm.
I think he was a South African guy. Can't remember his name.
Is that David Bosch?
No, 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 not David Bosch, but it wasn't David Bosch, and it definitely wasn't Reinhard Bonnke. But um, I can't remember who it was. But it was, that's so true. Is it's this call to radical risk. Jesus basically turned up and said, "Hey, I think you guys have missed the point a little bit here. Let's get back to it." And so that every step of the journey of discipleship should be calling into question that which you hold as sacrosanct.
So with that, if we've given it away, then as a church, how do we take it back? Like, is the ship sailed? Like, now we've got all of these various NGOs and church arms. Like, is there a place? And if so, how do we take back what we gave away?
That's a great question. Uh, Look, I'll say this: Jesus didn't uh, come on. He came to earth to help us establish, you know, the kingdom. Right? That's let's call that, as Desmond Tutu would call it, the rainbow family of God.
He's just
Right?
quoting South Africans. I
Right.
love
Yeah,
this.
Oh,
I
come.
love
yeah,
this, man.
yeah. Some of our greatest missiologists, man,
Yeah, not
and
you though, Nick.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's okay. I'm okay with that.
yeah. And Hansi Cronje, I think he said a few
Synchronia.
too, mate.
Wow.
Doing the
Wow.
plane
Wow.
engine on. I
Oh,
think
that
that
is funny.
was poor guy. But so he came to establish that, not to establish a charity arm, right? And so healing and feeding and advocating for justice were integral to the life of faith. And when we delegate it, when we create sanitized spirituality that's disconnected from human suffering, that not only diminishes the impact we have in the world, it diminishes the impact we have in the people's lives who we're caring for. And when we have a discipleship and a faith that is comfortable, and unfortunately, and this is the challenge for the church through every era of us being in suburbia, is how do we move from asking comfort level questions, which is often what we mistake for discipleship. How do I get my kids to the right school? How do I keep them away from the naughty
Yeah.
kids? How do I make well, they're comfort level questions. We
Hmm.
disconnect ourselves from suffering in the world. We disconnect ourselves from the questions that the people I'm in community with ask every day, which is, how am I going to survive tonight when it's -2 degrees out
Yeah.
there? And right? It's Christmas time, and I know my family are not inviting me because of the mistakes I've made in my life and the guilt and the shame. We not only begin to then ask God some deeper questions and the comfort level questions, is it gives us permission, therefore, to enter and engage our own areas of brokenness and suffering that have fallen short of the glory of God. And we're not only denying the world the power of what God and Jesus came to establish on earth, we're denying it to ourselves. And we wonder why we feel like any form of spirituality we are involved with at best feels a little bit anemic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I making sense at all?
Yeah, I think like I fundamentally would agree with that. I guess uh, when we're talking about the balancing act though, and we one of the things that the church is doing really really well is calling out sin and expressing this other side, and so it does well in that area, and then it doesn't do well in the social justice area. But I guess the question on the balancing act is, well, how do these things meet in the middle? Because there's one thing to sit in suffering with people and being and coming from South Africa. I think Nathan and Andrew actually had a conversation last week that just took me back home to so much suffering and so much pain and so much heartache, um, that brought tears to my eyes. And it's a reality that in the physical these people suffer, but it's also a reality that in the spiritual they're dead in their sin. And so you're trying to bring life in both areas. You're trying to sit with them in their suffering, not really having all the answers, but also trying to stir the life of Christ within them. And the church, if it's going to pick up this mantle, can't just pick up social justice as one component of it while
Mm.
neglecting this need
Bring the fullness of the kingdom.
to bring life,
Yeah.
the life of Christ into these individuals' lives, right? Like, what is that? How do we marry those two spaces in
World.
this world and in the balancing act? Yeah,
Yeah, beautiful. I would always, give comfort in the simple fact that you can't start building a bridge from the middle, right?
Mm.
Right? You have to start on the side that you're on and to look across
sure.
and to realize that the purpose of the bridge is to create a connection between, we have separated them, and they feel like they are on opposite sides of a flowing river. When you talk about how do we name personal sin and how do we name social societal sin at the same time. And so I think it's a responsible act. You cannot ignore it. It is a responsible act to say, how do we begin to reconnect these two worlds that have become separate. And we need to acknowledge the strengths of both sides, whilst also being able to have a dialogue, as Leslie Newbigin talked about in a beautiful book called The Open Secret. Is
Mm.
he said, how do we create a dialogue that's spirit led, that helps us discover our own shortcomings and work towards something even stronger? Meaning that, if you look at the social justice side, is unfortunately, as someone who has lived in that world, is people will you know pretty quickly get to the point where they'll say, I don't need to go to church anymore, and I don't really necessarily have a strong relationship with Jesus. And you say, I don't think that is a good outcome. Right.
Yeah.
uh, and on the other side is, it's Jesus, me, and a cup of tea. And, we create a bit of a hive mentality where we don't step out into the world. In fact, we start to see the world as a hostile place. And that's where I think some of the work of Reinhold Niebuhr is really important for us, is to say, is it Christ in culture, Christ against culture? I always, and I know it's a biblical kind of phrase, is, we often see holiness as set apart. How do we be a set apart people? And I think that's really important. But we need to balance it with holiness is also being set amongst
Yeah.
Mm.
the community. How can you be uh, Nathan, who is a member of the community in Orange, who has children in the high schools, who is there at the weekend on Saturday sports, but also is a part of, Orange Baptist Church at the same time as well. How do we integrate all those parts of our lives and not just um, have these kind of single serve interactions? Because I think the world needs us now. The world's craving it. We have something now so precious that people are clamoring for it. It's in the cities, but I also know it's in the country
Mm.
towns. Is, these connections in this community, and we've become globally homogenized but locally tribalized. uh you know
Mm.
uh which means, I can log onto my phone and see what's happening 6 continents away, and also realize that I'm in but I'm also connected with a group where, the only option is love our side and hate the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we wonder why mental health and anxiety and cyberbullying, our kids are struggling. I grew up comparing myself to exactly 84 kids. That's how many kids were in my primary school,
Mm.
right? So that was my yardstick, 84 other individuals. Now kids with their phones and their devices are comparing themselves to the entire world. So of course there's a 10-year-old with 6 million followers who knows how to juggle, right? And it makes our kids feel worried and anxious. And, I think people are looking for those local community connections, and we need it takes a village to raise a child, right?
Mm.
You know, and we need to rediscover the sense as a society of that wisdom that we hear in the Ubuntu, which is, I am who I am because of who we all are.
Look at this guy.
Look at this guy.
Look
Nick
at
Nick
this
Nick
guy.
quotes the Ubuntu all the time.
The less we know of each other, the less we are ourselves.
Yeah.
Less we're able to integrate that difference and that vitality of what God does. We're in the season of Pentecost, right? And there's a really simple way of looking at Pentecost and saying that is the reversal of Babel. And I say that's wrong, right? Is the reason that all these languages were given to us. I would say, if there's any lesson to be learned from Babel, is as a form of protection, where people are all the same, they get into the same hive mind and they say, let's become bigger than God. So all these languages are given as a protection against us trying to become too godlike, and to realize that, God is God and everything else of us is finite and below that.
Yeah.
And
That's
so this kind of gift of Pentecost is to say, my spirit is in all people, right? And how do we then begin to start our task of faith and discipleship and evangelism in that knowledge? rather than the one that says, let's all create some cultural conformity, which is the exact issue that got us to the Tower of Babel in the first place.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I think the thing that that I was really resonated, this sense of my words, not yours, but decompartmentalization as we think around living out our faith, right? So where where this person at work, where this like faith is kind of what we do on a Sunday, or maybe even on a Wednesday as we meet as a midweek group, or whatever the case may be. But this sense in which I wonder whether taking back the fullness of the gospel, where we're not just outsourcing the hard things to organizations, but we're living them out, is a sense in which we are coming to terms with we are Christ followers in every space and at every point of our day and our week and our month, and the way we interact is meaningful. And so we have a heart for those who need a voice, and that is a response of Jesus. And I'm the same in every space, and trying to advocate for the kingdom, showing love and speaking the love of Jesus in.
Now, you see, that I think it, because as you're speaking, I'm going, this is great. Like, it is great, but we sit here, three pastors.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Identifying that this is a problem. But the thing is, we will lead congregations and lead people and disciple people who are in entrenched positions because of this dichotomy, this false dichotomy that's been placed out there, right?
Well, it's been but I think it's not just placed. I think it's been built, right?
Yeah, and so but it's there, and so you're gonna kick again. Some people are gonna kick against this idea, and so I guess the question is, John, like, how are we going to practically disciple our churches toward
it's a good question.
building that bridge, right? Like, it's not for us, we can sit and identify it, but we've got to lead people through this and have grace for where they are, and almost for the entrenched positions that the churches and their leaders have put them in. And so how do we then take them out of that and draw them out of that?
That is a great question. And I would say this stuff has to be led, and it will always have a greater opportunity to grow and to spread through fascination rather than force.
Fascination, rather than
We
force.
we need to, I always hold one of our core texts here is, "Come, little children, let us love one another, for love is from God." And he who loves knows God. He who does not love does not know God. And so we say, if I really want to know God, probably the best way I can do it is by participating in the mission of this church. And so at Wayside, our mission is creating community with no us and them. So I say I define membership in this community as participation in our mission. So I'm more likely to call the atheist who volunteers here 4 to 6 hours a week to help hand out socks and underwear to rough sleepers on the streets and to make them cups of tea than I am the person who turns up once a fortnight, which is, by the way, the yardstick. If you have someone who comes once a fortnight to your church service, that means they're a highly committed member nowadays, apparently.
It's true. Mate, it's true.
Yep.
Yeah, and sign them up on the roster if they're coming once a fortnight, mate. Let me tell you.
Yep.
And to say, this, our mission is from God, and it is cannot be owned or manipulated by anyone. We can only be captured by what God's doing in our midst. How do we give ourselves over? So defining a mission is really important, and helping lead the way. How do I find Christ in the face of someone who is sleeping rough? How do I find Christ in the face of an atheist? How can I be the pastor to all of those people? Is the question I ask. And then I hope that, as Parker Palmer said he's got a beautiful book, I love the title, called "Let Your Life Speak." How do I let my life speak? And how do I keep the and this is a struggle for me, is how do I keep the joy of my salvation alive? It can so easily be lost. Like, you can lose your faith in ministry very easily. I can be so focused on a sermon, I don't actually take time to have a personal devotion time with Christ. I'm so busy talking about Jesus that I'm not spending any time with him. So, so and we need to be open and honest about those tensions too as leaders, and to show grace to ourselves, to our congregations, but also know that it is the Spirit that unsettles us, not us. And so allow the Holy Spirit to do its work. If I could digress, is when I first moved into Urban Neighbours of Hope, when we moved up to Mount Druitt to Sydney, there was this great church planning movement called Forge that was kind of running
Yeah,
through.
I remember Forge.
Yeah, so Forge was there, and as we were heading up to move from Melbourne to Sydney, my wife and my two little kids, this big guy who used to speak at a lot of Forge events. He was this big guy from California, jiu-jitsu fighter named John Jensen, and he grabbed me by the shoulders and he said, "Don't be so arrogant to think that you are taking God's Spirit with you to the place to which you are going." He said, "The most important task you will have, uh, the first 2 years you're there, is to sit down and shut up and to pray that God will reveal to you where the promises of his Spirit have been sung over that place.
Mm.
Listen to the song lines and the storylines of where the Spirit is at work, and then pray and beg God that you will be allowed to nudge those promises forward just 5 centimeters in the time that you have been allocated into that neighborhood."
Mm.
And I just thought that's the best advice ever. Is, as a local community pastor, I think we've become divorced from our local context. Many local churches. Sorry, I'm ranting and raving.
No, it's good,
Remember
mate.
to rock into, like, because before this, my ministry with Urban Neighbours of Hope, I was essentially what's called a tent maker. So I used to go and speak and sing for my supper because we lived by faith. So I'd get invitations to drive down, and 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I'd drive down and go to Fig Tree and say, "Where's the Anglican church?" And they'd say it's there. And where's the Baptist church? And they'd say it's there. Now I drive into these towns and all these churches have weird names. So where's where's Healing Waters? And some kid would say, "Is that the massage parlor?" You know, it's like you just don't know what's going on anymore. How do we re-find our? Yeah, you should have heard the night I was speaking in Port Kembla, mate. It was
John, that's so good though.
So good.
oh
Healing
dear.
Waters is a massage part.
Yeah.
That's
Tummy
so
tickle
good.
church or something, and you're just like, come on, guys, give me some local community identity. Why I say that is if we, like we do a lot of acknowledgement of country, right? And I think if you just do it as a rote, you may as well give up on it, like the way you say grace every day, but you're not really saying grace if you grew up in a Christian house. Is to say, what is the story of this place? So, I was in a church where the minister stood up and said, we just found out through our relationship with the local land council that this is a place where three rivers meet. So it's a gathering place for tribes, and so we want our church to continue that story. How do we be a gathering place where people from different backgrounds can have a dialogue?
Yeah.
What are the stories of this neighborhood that are ancient and continue on, and to acknowledge the work that God has been doing in the lives of this land, right? How do you divorce land and location from the gospel? You cannot, right? But we have. And so, how do we take that seriously again? What's the story of God's work in Orange? You know, and what's the story where God's Spirit is being resisted? We used to do this thing with our family, where we do an examine at the end of the night, and we'd ask them a couple of questions. Where have you seen God's Spirit at work? And we'd say, and where have you seen God's Spirit resisted? And what can you do about it? They were the three questions. We examine a conscience.
I think I so when I came to Orange last year, we did this hamper thing for Christmas, and it's really a great thing, feeding I think 175 families or something like that.
So we used to run, but up until COVID, for 20 odd years, well before I was here, we used to run a Christmas lunch, And
Yeah.
on a big year, there'd be 450 people. And then COVID kind of hit and killed it in that sense. And so what we tried to adapt really quickly in that the first year, we started running hampers. And in a real sense, we were able to make more of an impact by running hampers than we were kind of holding it at the function center. And so we've kind of continued on. So, yeah, I think last year we fed like 650 people.
Yeah, and I think coming from my context, because I was with Nath during that time, I think just to get a bit of a sense of
as
what
we're
this
delivering.
looks like, and so coming from my context, we would be able to on a day of outreach or any given day that the church is engaging with the community, walk into a township area, knock on a door, and they would welcome us in. They would welcome us in with open arms. Like there's this openness and the sense of openness toward the gospel amongst the poverty stricken within Africa that is profound to me. And I would be able to equip and take a group of high school kids into a community. We would sing and they would just be welcomed in, and there would be food offered to us and stuff like that. Where here last year, I would knock on a door. There was one instance that I think the people welcomed us in and there was such joy in this space. And I sort of did not take the opportunity to share the gospel, and I kicked myself a little bit for that. But by and large, it was, leave it on the step. They did not even open the door. They opened it slightly, leave it on the step over there, and we will accept that. And like that's a barrier to faith. That's a barrier to communication. And there's
a barrier to relationship.
Yeah, and there's this sense of like, what are you doing here? What do you want with us? Kind of an element which is confronting to me. It's confronting to me coming from a context that open their hearts and their arms to this idea of, come in, walk with us, be among us. This Ubuntu kind of thing that takes place, right? And I just, what do we do about stuff like that?
You got a few minutes to explore this or not?
Yeah, mate. We got as much time as you want. Let's go. Let's go.
All right. Well, I'm going to respond in two ways. One, and it might be hardcore, so you might need to edit it or cut it out.
No, let's go.
When we engage in the stories of our neighborhood and our community, they're not divorced from culture and history. And so we need to really do that grappling work. Every text without a context is a sure sign that you're being conned, right? So when you're sharing the gospel, they're hearing it from their context, right? And particularly when you're sharing it with communities that have been dispossessed or have been hurt by the church. As ministers, we know a lot of our work is with people who have been hurt by the church. We know that people go, no, we just want to engage, saying, hey, no, you know me, I'm a good guy and I love Jesus and Jesus loves you. And they can't separate that from that past. So we need to do that hard work. So we know, it's Alistair McIntyre who wrote a book called After Virtue, and I quote that because it's a book I haven't read because it's too complex for me. It makes me sound smart. But he's great.
There's a pastor for you.
Yep. Sounds about right.
His great quote, though, is, I cannot begin to answer the question of what should I do if I first cannot answer the question of what story am I a part? You are a part of this great gospel story that begins in a garden and ends in a garden, right? We're also a part of a story that is part of Orange, using your community as the example. And we need to have both in context to say, where's God at work in this? Soren Kierkegaard tells a story about this little local village where there's a fireman and he's so well loved in the town, and they always have dinner parties and celebrate this fireman. And then one night there is a fire and the town hall's burning down, and the fireman rushes with the truck, and he can't get to the fire because the whole village has surrounded the town hall and they're all shooting at the town hall with a squirt gun. And he said, and the fireman flies in with the siren saying, what the hell are you doing? And they all look at him with this big smile on their faces saying, while shooting their gun, saying, what little we do with joy in our hearts, right? And the fireman says, get the F out of the way, right? There's a fire on. This is not about you feeling good about your contribution. It's about putting out the fire, right? people's lives are burning down, right? And we need to work out ways we can put out the fire. And that's where God's Spirit's at work. So that's one story. It's pretty harsh. The other story is about Australian culture that we really need to grapple with. And Dave Andrews talks about this a lot in his compassionate community work courses in his book. Is the starting level, Nick, for Aussies is there's two things: curiosity and suspicion. Aussies are like this: suspicion, curiosity is down here, right? So anything that happens is always met with suspicion, right? You're not the only time. There are only two real times I can identify that the Aussies' curiosity edges above suspicion, right? And they are at threshold moments, right? And that means if someone's moved into a new neighborhood, you have about 2 to 3 weeks to knock on your neighbors' doors. You leave it for 4 weeks. People are saying, "What's wrong with you? Are they trying to scope out our house?" But for 2 weeks, try. Have you ever been at the scene of a car accident? All of a sudden, we're talking to each other, or some sort of disaster, or some sort of tragedy, or some sort of liminal time is when people will engage with each other, where you can cross. Otherwise, if you are trying to be door knocking, you are fighting against gravity in that space. We are just the most suspicious bunch of people in the world. What's the problem? What are you trying to give me? What's the catch? Just leave it on the doorstep. We also, and Melbourne's a bit different. Hospitality inside the house is a thing. I'm not sure. Sydney's definitely not like that. We meet out. We don't invite people into our homes in the same way. So it's about knowing the culture. So how do we stop fighting against gravity and start building some contextual models of engagement? Why I share those two long stories is we really need to identify how things serve us, because I'm just going to say it. There's this big Christian charity that every Christmas runs a big outreach, and I call it Operation Shitbox.
Yeah. Sorry. Sorry, that was probably too much of an overt, but I'm so with you. Yeah, keep going. No, please. I've been crucified.
What the hell is that for?
Oh, I know.
Like, oh my God.
Oh, I'm hearing you.
Yeah, it is. It's horrendous. And what do you get? You get these shots of these poor kids. They're like, better smile when this arrives, and mob the truck when this box full of crap turns up.
While you're ruining businesses down the road.
I'm just like, please, give me a break. Yeah. And we got to break that mindset, right? I don't mind what we do, but why do we do it?
Yeah.
Are we giving out hampers in order to engage with people? Right? Or is this just a one-off thing that I get to feel so good about?
Yeah.
Giving out. Squirting a water, right? Yeah. At the fire that's going on in people's lives.
Yeah. We literally had this conversation last week. So
I mean, here's busy work for discipleship.
No, 100%, right? So we're having this exact conversation last week, John, where we're trying to figure out, as we're trying to nut through together and with our leadership on how we're going to engage more and more with our own local context. And then saying, well, why are we doing what we're doing? One of the things that we're having to be really honest is going, what's our motivation and intention behind doing this? Is it so that we can say, well, look at us, look at all the hampers we're giving out? Or is the intention behind this are we genuinely trying to meet a need and reach people where they're at and engage and develop relationships for kingdom's sake, right? Because even that, like when we think about it in a true sense for the kingdom, people aren't projects, and we're not just trying to meet a need and leave. We're actually seeing people because Jesus saw us, and we're trying to engage with people because Jesus engages with us. And because of Jesus, we see absolute worth in other human beings. And in that space, sitting and meeting and being there. And I do wonder, how much of it, and I wonder if part of the reason why we then outsourced this to our NGOs is because it gave us that very means to say, look what we're doing without actually having to get our hands dirty. And so that's this question for me on around what is our motivation truly, and what is the heart of our intention, and actually just realizing that in our own sin there is it's not pure. It's not pure. It never will be 100% pure. I get it. But surely it's got the goodness of it's got to far outweigh our own pats on the back.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, like I think it's this, because when we get into social justice, right, it can become a virtue signal.
Oh, it can be.
It can become the space where it's like, yeah, look at me. Look at what I do. Look at how I love on this particular community or whatever.
Dude, I just did it. I'm like, just before I was like, yeah, we've fed like 650 people. I'm like, even then I'm like, why don't I even say that? What a stupid thing to say. Anyway, yeah, keep going. I hear.
You get a naughty badge though. It's okay.
Thanks,
mate.
man.
What are we trying to do? Are we trying to build this family of God that has so much diversity in it, right? And what I mean by that is I know some churches that say, oh yeah, we've ticked that box. We do this community meal. And if you go to that community meal, it is the most it's horrible. Like you have all Christians preparing and serving and talking to each other about how good they are. And then they're on one side of the counter. Then all these poor guys come in and they serve them. And the only interaction they have is they have to be grateful for the food that they've given, right? They don't have any choices in it whatsoever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just think, this is the point of this. And they'll go, oh, it's to feed empty bellies. And you said, oh my God, is that the only reason you're doing it? Like, how are you sharing your life and your faith, and how are you being challenged on those perspectives by the people the an Aboriginal lady once rephrased Ubuntu to me as you are who you eat with. And look at our dinner tables. When I was living in Mount Druitt, if you went down to the local Westfield at lunchtime, went to the food court, you could see you are who you eat with in action. All the social workers and professional workers are at one end with their little plastic squares around their hips on one end, and all the people they were trying to serve are at the other end. And no one ever shared any meals together. Are we? There isn't another. I always talk out of both sides of my mouth here. Is when I talked about suspicion and curiosity, is when people's BAU in life breaks down, when the kid gets sick, when the marriage breaks down, when the parents get elderly and frail, is a time where the curiosity edges up and people are open to seeking out others. Is how do you locate yourself as the person they will go to? So, right, Wayside we're open 7 days a week. We're in 2 locations, 120 staff, 600 volunteers, all faiths and everything. Most of my regular volleys say, I'm an atheist, John, and that's fine. But then when the wife dies, they say, can I have some pastoral care? Can I come to you as my pastor? Can you help me?
And the spiritual conversations flow.
Yeah, we have these conversations where faith sharing. Also, faith sharing is far more effective. It's tenfold more effective when someone is in curiosity rather than suspicion, particularly in this country. And so it's so often we say, when you're raising your kids and they come home one day and they say, hey, I was just out at youth group and the leader said this, and you're like, oh my God, I've only told you that 4,000 times, right? But all of a sudden 19-year-old Brent says it, and all of a sudden you think it's Jesus speaking themselves, is because they're in suspicion with us as parents most of the time, but they're just in this open window of curiosity out at youth group, right, in those liminal times. So how do we know when it is wise to how do we identify those moments, right? One of our deep values here is no complacency, because we know that at any one moment could be that time where that spark of life and curiosity is at work, but most of the time it's not. But how do we, our part of our faith and discipleship is to say, God, help me to have my eyes awake to where your sparks of the Spirit are igniting in people's hearts, right?
Yeah, but even with that, right? Like, there's 2 parts to that. Like it's one thing to be praying that prayer in the safety of your own kind of protected bubble, and there's another thing to be saying that same prayer in a space of being open and vulnerable and within a context where there is challenge and meeting the needs of people, right? Because it's hard to hear the whisper of the Holy Spirit when we surrounded ourselves and we've padded our own walls and we're comfortable and the likes. And I think this is the thing for me, and this is what I love about you, John, and this is why we wanted to have you on, because this isn't just an ideology to you. Like I think for a lot of it, and I think Nick hit it out of, like even the intention of this podcast is for our people. Like we don't really care if it goes anywhere beyond this, right? And we're trying to invite our congregation into the conversations that we're having.
Yeah.
And this is the conversation that we're having with you, is the kind of conversations that we're having in our office and around our dinner table, trying to figure this stuff out together. But for you, is like we're trying to figure it out, but you've lived this out. Like you were in this building, of units in Melbourne. You did move to Mount Druitt and had an open home, and then now you have moved to the Wayside Chapel in that space. You've lived this out, but you said that there's a cost, and the cost is our own comfort. We can't be scared of it, but we've got to be honest about it. How hard has this journey been for you to live out a picture of discipleship? What's the cost been to you and to your family?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's a
Within reason, man. You don't have to share like it's up to you what
yeah.
you want to share. But
Look, our kids are now adults and living out their own lives, and so we've certainly heard about what some of the costs have been for them. Also heard what some of the benefits are as well. So let me talk about it a little bit. Is Yeah. First of all, and this is related, is same but different. I'd say one of the core planks of our philosophy is that salvation comes from the feet rather than through the head. You know, you don't think yourself into a new way of living so much as you live yourself into a new way of thinking, right? So if we are keen about discipling our or walking at the life of faith with our families and our friends and our colleagues and our work, is we will focus on our actions. Are our actions caring? Why I use that phrase about salvation is, silly example. You can know everything that's wrong about gambling on the pokies, and you can be addicted to the pokies, and you can read it, and you can do a course, but it's not until you use your feet to walk away from the pokies that you will experience the freedom that's there. Same, you can know all that is you're meant to do as a follower of Jesus, but if you're not actually walking it in your daily walk, is you're not going to experience the freedom that is in there. What I do appreciate about the life that we did lead is our kids never had to sit us down and say, "What are the things you value as followers of Jesus?" They saw it lived out, right? Our faith and our values weren't a statement on the wall. They saw it every day, and so we were able to affirm their own personhood and their own gifts uh, within that context. I remember one story was Lisa's very caring. I'm more entertaining, and the police brought this young girl who'd been beaten up because they needed a place for her to stay overnight. We built some very strong relationships with the local police and the local high school, and this girl was quite battered and bruised and upset. And one of my kids immediately sat next to her and just gently rubbed her arm and stroked her arm and checked out how she was. My kids were 4 or 5 at the time.
Hmm.
And the other one of my kids immediately made peanut butter and jelly toast, jam toast, and gave it to her. And I thought, that's me and Lisa, our mini versions in actions of how we minister. You know,
Hmm.
one of them is very caring. How are you going? And the other one is, let me feed you. That was more me.
Hmm.
And so they got to, we were able to affirm that. But, there have been costs, at times we were more focused on the ministry. We had an open home. We had people in and out all the time, which at times, one of our kids was very uh, um, excited about that and loved it. And when that phase of our life finished up, was quite sad that it was. But the other kid was quite happy when that finished up, because she always felt it as a rejection to have our house open to others. Um, am I not enough to be one of your kids? Why have you always got these other
Yeah,
people
so
too? So, you're not always going to get it right. One of our kids is very active in her local church and congregation, and the other one is the jury is definitely out. Definitely does not call herself a follower of Jesus right now. And the one thing I do take comfort in, not comfort, but she said, "I'm not a Christian because I know what it costs." Right? And I said, "At least you're making a right,
yeah, you're making an educated response, right?
yeah, yeah, a well considered decision." I don't know if that's a good thing, or not, but
It is hard,
And
mate. It is so hard.
yeah. But you know what? I said, give yourself a break too. Like, when your kids fall off the rails, everyone goes, "Pastor's kid, mate. Look at him." But you know what? No one ever looks at a plumber and says, "Look at those kids off the rail, mate. Plumber's kids." You know,
Yeah.
what do we always index on the behavior of pastor's
And
kids?
to be honest, mate, I'm at a point where I just don't care what they say. Like honestly, and I know that sounds kind of harsh, but mate, if we spend all of our time worrying about what other people are saying about us and our kids, then we've actually missed the point, and we don't actually then love and care for ourselves or our kids.
Mate, I
Um,
deal with a few pastors' kids here, and yeah, I can say your approach is the right one.
Mate,
What?
yeah, I say that. I haven't always gotten it right, by the way. And like you, it's a challenging space, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it is. And, it's one of those things. Like, even for me, like I'm in ministry a long time now. And,
yeah,
I look back,
That's another naughty badge for you, by the way.
yeah. I look back and sometimes like genuinely I wish I had have done things differently and been different in that way or less intense in other ways. And I but I realized too in the midst of that, um there is a gift that we've given our kids in that space, which is not this fake dad's the pastor, he must be perfect, but they
yeah,
get to see our own humanness in the midst of all of that. And I think
yeah,
that's this thing about living out this authentic life, right?
yeah.
We're trying to be authentic in every space, in the home, with our neighbours, with our likes, and this is the key for us to be living out
Yeah.
gospel ministry.
Can I say that the costs are real, and if you're in ministry at the margins, you will, as a family, absorb some of the trauma and the chaos. That's a part of it, and so our kids grew up around the addiction and the mental illness and the poverty in ways that shaped their worldviews, and um, that now they're grateful for. But at the time, they were so young, and there was a cost. There was sleepless nights, interrupted holidays, financial uncertainty, but um, you know, um, they've also learned compassion, resilience, and what it means to have authentic faith. And I think one of the keys is having proximity to the struggle. I don't want to ever raise virtue signalers or people who say I shouldn't be happy because of what's happening in the world. I want people to be able to, uh, and kids who can sit with people in their own struggles, but also see the joy and the hope that's there as well. So, yeah, let me encourage you to, as you continue to walk the walk and do the work. If you want to be a health minister over the times, go to therapy, do marriage
Yeah, mate,
counselling,
do it. I do it regularly. It's good stuff.
do it all.
It's good
Get the
stuff.
medication. You know they prescribe. It's God working through the medication sometimes. Yeah,
100%, 100%
yeah,
it is. And that's honesty and truth right there. We still live in a broken, fallen world, and we are still busted ourselves. And I think that's the thing that compels us to keep going. Right, is knowing that there is a time, and it's coming soon, where there will be no more pain and no more suffering, and there will be no more need for medications and the likes. And man, I can't wait for Jesus' return. Hey, mate, thanks so much for spending this time with us. Truly, really value. I'd love to have another conversation with you sometime down the line. But mate, honestly, I know you're incredibly busy, so thank you so much for giving up your time to hang out with us on the Balancing Act.
Yeah.
Oh, mate, it's been an honor. And sometimes I hang out with a mate who has a little property in Little Hartley and then visit my friends over in Orange. So if I'm ever out there, I'll let you know.
Mate, come out. Love to catch up with you face to face. Thanks heaps, mate. Really appreciate
Cheers,
your
John.
time.
Thanks
Bless
so
ya.
much, man.
See you guys. God bless you.
Cheers, mate. Hey, man, what a convo.
Dude.
What a fantastic guy. John's a legend, mate. What a fantastic conversation. There is so much in that conversation that we could unpack.
He's so insightful, man.
And in fact, just off the cuff, I'd actually love to turn, however long this debrief is going to be, we could actually make this just a conversation, a longer conversation just between the two of us. Because
something ongoing, I guess.
Because I think it is a conversation that requires ongoing dialogue.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that kept hitting out of me. Even as John was talking, there were so many times where I'm like, oh, I got to check my own heart. What are my own motivations? What are my own intentions? And there's some uncomfortableness in that. Like, if I'm honest, and I actually love that feeling of being uncomfortable and challenged in that conversation. That I can't wait actually for Andrew to finish editing and putting it up. Andrew, by the way, for everyone who's listening, is our producer and just a banger guy. But I want to be able to listen back to that.
And make some notes. And
Make
go,
some notes,
This is a talking point. This is a talking point. Like, there's stuff in there that we've got to unpack at a greater level, right?
I think we've got to unpack it for two reasons, though. I think we've got to unpack it because this hits at the heart of our discipleship, as in me and you. Like, not as pastors, not as church, but I'm talking about us as brothers in Christ, mates, challenging one another to live more intentionally, more honestly for Jesus. Like, I want to move away from this idea that we want to live more radically for Jesus, because it just seems to me that as I'm reading the New Testament again at the moment, that what we are deeming radical just was almost normative. Like, I want to say almost normative because you got issues like we're preaching through in 1 Corinthians where it doesn't feel like that was necessarily kind of the heart of the community. But I think it is I think this honest, robust conversations around living out and speaking out the gospel in ways that genuinely encapture the gospel is so imperative.
You know, yeah, I in many ways I don't know where to begin, and I don't know where I want to end. But I'm going to start at the end, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Well,
like,
it's just the two of us.
Like, I think the thing that's resonating with me quite deeply at the moment is when we spoke about your family, and not your family, but family. As you engage in this, right? As you respond to this really, it's confronting. It's deeply confronting what we spoke about today. But there is part of me is going, I've seen too many children who have parents that are in ministry just walk away. They just, the cost is too great. And I'm going to say something that maybe is tough to hear. And I'm saying it not because this is right, but this is how I feel, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
But I listen to what he's saying, and I've looked at people that I've engaged with, right? One of the things that I've sort of set my heart on is that my family is my first ministry space. It's my first place of ministry. I have to get that right first. And when we were talking about the cost of what this looks like, to live with the marginalized people, and it's to live with these people that are confronted with darkness and are confronted with their lives burning down kind of a thing. The reality of my first reality of how I'm responding is, wow, I don't even know if I can bring myself to say it. It's crazy to pure honesty, right? The reality is, I don't know if that guy is worth my son's salvation. So I don't know if I'm willing to take the risk of taking my family through that space and in the process losing my son.
Yeah, man. I fully get that. Honestly, yeah,
It's crazy.
it's such a hard space to think through,
Mm.
right? Like, we love our kids more than anything,
More than anything.
and in lots of ways. And I get what you're saying in terms of, going into those marginalized. I think context is key here. You know, in a sense, as pastors, we are opening up our homes and our lives all the time anyway, and not just like, even for us on a Sunday, when we preach, we're opening up ourselves, right? And in opening up ourselves, we are opening up our families and our children in that space too. And so, in a sense, there is two things here. There's one, going into the marginalized and opening up our homes and allowing that in. But in a sense, we're opening up our homes and our lives anyway, even to the more comfortable spaces that is church. And that's just as hard. And when we're trying to marry the two of those things, how do we reach the marginalized in our own community, realizing that it takes relationship, and we open up ourselves in the nature of our ministry by and large? It's a double whammy.
Yeah.
It's a double whammy on our families. And it's funny, like, as I think back, when we first came to Orange, I was so gun ho, man. I'd put my, I was like, stupidly like, I'll put my family at risk. Yeah, I want to go and live. I actually said to Karen, what do you reckon if we got a house right in the middle of the worst part of our town? And Karen went, Nathan, I love how passionate you are, and I'm paraphrasing, but in a sense, like, please don't put us in physical harm in that way. Like,
Yeah.
just think about what you're saying. And in my gun ho-ness, I think like, I couldn't reconcile that. And my wife had huge amounts of wisdom, right? Karen was amazing, and we moved into the area that God wants us to be in, and we've been able to establish relationships as that area of Orange. Well, it was nothing really when we moved there, but it's now huge, and so there has been a place for us in that space. But we are still called. We're still called to live this honest and authentic life. And I'm hearing what John's saying, and he's like pretty crazy radical in that space. Like, we didn't get to unpack it too much, but like, John moved into the worst part of like Western Sydney, in and around Mount Druitt and the local areas, and he literally had this small home that he opened up all the time for people to come and go, like, and anyone and sundry really. Which I remember talking to him about that 20 years ago and just thinking, whoa, like, I was so inspired. And how can you not be when you talk to him, right? Like, he's so engaging. But also recognizing that he was called specifically into that space. But the cost has been huge to him and his family.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure that we're necessarily called into the same space. And maybe you are. I don't know. But we got to minister faithfully to where we're at, I think. I think we're just rambling, but anyway.
No, but I mean, like, so that conversation, we'll have to listen to it back, because there was so much that was said that sitting here, I'm also feeling like, well, what are the practical things?
Right.
What is that? Like, what's the how in all of this?
Yeah.
We spoke about some of the church's failings. We spoke about some of the church's strengths. We spoke about the idea of social justice, that becomes this means of virtual signaling, and how that's not actually kingdom orientated, and how we've got to remain kingdom orientated. And all of that's true,
That's
right?
true. And we've got to work through that, and we've got to think through that
But the question is the
practically.
how, right?
Right.
Like, so how
How do we do that?
we do that? How do the people that are going to listen to this go, man, this is encouraging to me, and then take it on and go, I want to do this. So I would have loved to have gone at the end and gone, John, I know context matters, and we're all in different contexts. 2 practical things. One practical thing that I can start doing today that's going to make me go, this is what it looks like.
Yeah, but I think, but John did give us that.
And that's what I'm saying. I think
But
that was
John,
there,
no, he was,
right?
because the first thing is like even little things, like he said, and I think he's right, that in an Australian context, you've got 3 weeks to kind of connect with your neighbours. Otherwise, it's a bit of a shot duck,
I've
right?
sort of shot that in the foot altogether.
Yeah.
If I didn't know that.
Yeah. But I think that's something that's really practical. You know, when there are changes of people in our neighbourhood, we've got to get on that.
Yeah.
So we can build meaningful relationships. But I think the other thing too is how we respond to crisis in our own community.
Yeah.
As a church and as individuals.
Yeah.
That enables us to have that space where that skepticism is lower and the interest becomes higher.
Yeah, I thought that was good.
Yeah, me too. I thought that was gold to think about. And I think we need to be thinking about that as a community of faith. That inevitably, when crisis comes, how are we, as a community of faith here at OBC, ready to respond in meaningful ways?
Yeah.
And I've seen us do that already. And a couple of years ago, we had the floods in Ugara. But how do we learn those lessons then and get ready and carry them forward for the next crisis that is inevitably around the corner? I think that's another component. How do we build meaningful relationships on a week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year basis with other parts of our community?
Yeah.
We do these hampers, which are meaningful. And the team, and here's the kicker, right? So in the church of our size, and it's pretty substantial, there are 3 to 4 people on any given week who serve faithfully in the ministry of delivering hampers into the local community as needed, right? In partnership with an NGO here in town. But those people are connecting with people and they're praying for people. And one of the challenges for me is to go, well, how do we celebrate them and how do we release others into that space?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. And then I think we need to think about it on a larger level and think, well, what resources has God given us as a community of faith, and discovering the story and the needs, because I think they're connected, right? Of the community around us.
Yeah.
And thinking strategically on how we're actually going to meet real need for real purpose, rather than it just kind of going, well, here's what Orange Baptist Church does, tick, 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 tick.
Yeah, sure. And I think
does that make sense?
absolutely. I think, but the onus is on us a little bit.
No,
I
it
mean,
is.
we
It
spoke.
is on us.
We spoke about these NGOs and these churches and how these churches have outsourced the space. And I think in many ways we've got to take back what belongs to us a little bit. Like, I'm not saying stop working with NGOs, and I'm not saying defund the NGOs. I'm not saying.
Well, I thought we were going into a whole nother political minefield there.
I'm not saying these things, right? No, that was sorry.
That was so good. Anyway,
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is there is an element of this that places our leadership as a church and church leadership on the whole in positions where they need to be asking the questions, how are we creating opportunities for our members to engage with the community?
No,
what does that look like for us as leaders to do that realistically? And you're right, we are thinking through that strategically.
No, we are thinking through. But the other side to that is, and I know you know this because I know we're talking about this, but it's not just for us who are in positions of leadership. God has got people in our community of faith and in community faiths all over the show with huge amounts of gifts and abilities who already understand the needs within their own community, who may not actually be on leadership.
Yes, you're right.
Right, who may not actually be on leadership. And I guess this becomes the thing for us individual, like for us, I'm talking you and me, but also for church leadership in variety of different churches, that we need to not only ask good questions, but we actually need to listen to the experts in the room who may not actually hold positions of office, but we need to go and find our people in our community of faith, and even people in other community of faiths within our own town who have got real knowledge, real understanding for us to sit with and say, so we've got all of these ideas, for them to turn around and go,
So bad.
yeah, that's useless.
So bad.
But do you know what I'm saying?
I know.
Because I would hate for us to get to a point where we end up in this kind of soup kitchen, the way John described it, where it's kind of like the Christians are in the kitchen going, aren't we doing amazing? And then kind of enforcing this sense of like, you poor person, you need to thank us. Like that's disgusting.
It is disgusting.
And I think the risk is at trying to do something without an understanding and without wisdom and conviction from the Holy Spirit, then we run that risk.
But that's part of the strategy then as a leader, right?
Right.
The strategy as a leader is going identify, empower, equip, and then release.
Well, but even before that,
like
pray. Like we need to pray, and we need to spend
I thought
time.
I implied that in all of those processes.
No, you're just not spiritual
Okay,
enough. But
thanks,
but in all
my
honesty, no. But seriously, like we need these moments of concerted prayer.
You're right.
But not just for and I guess to turn the ramblings initially, because I think we were lost after that conversation. My head is spinning.
We're getting better now.
I hope so. If not, Andrew, can you work your magic? But I think it's the same thing, right? That as we begin with prayer and conversations for us as a church, for us as individuals and for brothers in Christ, we need to be praying with our families and for our families, but we also need to be praying with each other and for each other, that we continue to model what this looks like.
Yep.
Both for our family and for our churches. And you know what, mate? I think we need to trust Jesus with our kids and with our families.
Yeah.
And we just need to live as faithfully as we can.
Sure.
Trusting it, because in my current circumstances, bro, that's all I got.
And that's the thing, right? That's why it was so difficult for me to say it, is because in that vulnerable moment, I feel like, no, I am powerless, and I need to take as much power as I can over this space. And I know that there's nothing I can do. Like
I know, yeah.
The reality is, you could dedicate 18 years to raising your son or your daughter as best as you can, not really putting them in any real spaces of sacrifice, and
they still end up in a place where you don't want them to be.
And it's like, okay, Lord, and that there is that part of you that has to surrender that. I think in that moment of vulnerability, I feel like I wanted to just voice that and go,
this
is what I'm feeling.
But I'm glad you did, because if I'm honest, I feel that too, and I felt that. Like I felt that as my kids are older, right? And so it feels a bit different. But I remember as my kids were little, really feeling that. And then even beyond that, like my heart reaches out even further, because you left South Africa, because God is called, but also to bring some level of protection and security and safety for your two beautiful kids.
Yeah.
Right. And so then you've made such sacrifices to come and to minister here. And then my heart breaks for you then to go, but I don't want to add more. Like I'm trying to take them, like, and I think, but that's the challenge of a parent.
It is.
But I don't think that's just us. I actually think that's everyone in our congregation.
And that's why I wanted to voice it.
Yeah, and I love that.
Because I agree. I think if someone's going, man, you're telling me to just do this, what about my family?
Right.
What about where I'm going to be, right? Like, and the other thing I want to say in this, Nath, is no man is an island.
No, that's right.
And so if people listen to this and they're going, I'd love to do this, and you're not in community,
well, then it's not going to fly.
It's not going to work.
But again, that's what John kept heading out of. This whole idea, and I know we preach it too, this whole idea that now you can come to church on a fortnightly basis and somehow you're the most committed. It's true. John's right.
it's
Statistically, it is.
ridiculous.
But that is what's going on.
Yeah, that's the benchmark.
That's the
Absolute-
benchmark. But
absolute.
how's that the benchmark?
Yeah.
Like, and we're not just saying that as pastors. Like, I'm just talking to you as a follower of Jesus. Like, man, if that's the benchmark, because here's the truth. If we weren't in ministry vocationally, what we're doing is still what we're called to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The complexity will come where we're having to work full time like people in our congregation do, but we would still have to live missionally in that space too.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're still got to be committed to a community of faith because it is the community of faith that holds us. It is the community of faith that helps raise our children. It is the community of faith that prays and covers us. It is the community of faith that where we can find rest and accountability,
Yep.
and sometimes a bit of a push out the door.
And there's this element, I mean, again, just there's so much, right? But there's this element of going, and this is where we will mature in our intentional downward mobility. Like, it's
What about that? That was the whole thing. This
Right?
intentional downward
mobility.
rather than this intentional upward mobility, which is, mate, I'm going to be honest with you. I only want for my own children. I muck around with this all the time. I'm like, I can't wait for my son to earn good money so that he can take care of me.
Yeah,
Like I say, like I know it's a joke, but in a sense, there is an element of truth. Like, but are we going to celebrate the intentional downward mobility?
Becoming like Jesus.
Whoa,
And as
in
you grow
humility.
in maturity, you become more like Jesus. And so you become, it's just but all of these things, man, this is done in community.
In
You
community, yeah.
want to get engaged in outreach and reaching the community and touching the lives of
You
people
gotta
as
be in
best as you
community.
can. Be in community.
Yeah.
You want to do intentional downward mobility. Be in community. Like,
Yep.
get involved with your community.
Yeah.
And if you get involved with a church that's patting themselves on the back because they do that funny soup kitchen,
Out.
figure it out, man.
Figure it
Like-
out, man. Yeah, got to challenge it. It's good.
Like, it's good stuff.
That's good stuff. Hey, we need to wrap this up, but let's make a deal. Let's listen back to that. Let's pull some stuff out and let's just have a conversation around particular stuff. There was so many nuggets of gold in that convo with John. Man, we got to get him back. Hey.
Yeah, and I don't like listening to myself. I
No, I
don't
hate
really
it.
like listening to you, but
I don't either, to be fair. Like, no, I get that. Maybe we'll just get Andrew to
Yeah.
give us a manuscript
Can
of
you
what
just-
John said.
can you just
just give me what John said? Because the rest of what we say is useless.
Yeah.
But from there, hey, thanks for joining us. Goodbye, everybody. Catch you very soon.
cheers, guys.